Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching the Wire Wrap. I'm Sravasti Dasgupta. Ahead of the Bihar Assembly elections, not all seems to be well in the ruling National Democratic Alliance camp, with cracks already appearing just days after seat-sharing arrangements were announced. Trump, meanwhile, has triggered a political storm in India after he claimed that Prime Minister Modi had agreed to stop buying Russian oil, which has allowed the opposition to corner the Modi government once again. And it's pollution season in Delhi, but the Supreme Court has allowed the bursting of firecrackers after pleas were filed by both the centre as well as the Delhi government. Meanwhile, in Gujarat, the entire cabinet has been rejigged, barring two ministers. To discuss all this, I am being joined by Javed Ansari, he's senior journalist, and Yamini Aiyar, she's a columnist and policy expert. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's get started with what's happening in Bihar. We've seen that seat-sharing arrangements were announced by the NDA first. The India Mahagathbandhan is yet to announce their seat-sharing arrangements. But what has come to the fore is that not all is well in the camp of the NDA, even as they try very hard to put across a front of being united. Upendra Kushwaha has openly said that not all is well in the NDA this time. Jitan Ram Manjhi has said that he's not satisfied. JDU leaders we have seen have been on protest outside Nitish Kumar's house. And today we have seen that Amit Shah is in Bihar. He has met Nitish Kumar and photographs have come out of them together. But what's really happening? Are they united or are they not, Javed?
Look, there's confusion and there's dissatisfaction in both the camps, and which doesn't surprise me at all. Over the years, I've been covering elections and I've seen whenever there are multiple parties involved, this is what happens. This is what happened in Janata Dal, this is what happened in UPA. The BJP, the NDA appears to be slightly better off, but that's primarily because the BJP is in power at this center also. And there are things that you can do to mollify, to strong arm, disgruntled allies, to bring them around Upendra Kushwaha or Nitish Kumar. You can smoothen his ruffled feathers. It's slightly difficult when you're in the opposition because there's not so much you can do, and the opposition parties are fighting to gain a foothold. There are problems in the NDA, there are problems in the Mahagathbandhan as well. Today was the last day for filing of nominations for the first round, and the Mahagathbandhan has not been able to announce formally, although word coming out of Bihar is that they've finally reached an arrangement whereby Mr. Sahni's party has also been accommodated, and then they contest overall 15. They initially wanted to contest 25, but we still don't know whether the CPI, CPM, ML and all the other sundry smaller parties are entirely on board or not. And the India Gathbandhan should be clear that the only way you stand a chance against the BJP is if all of them band together, or if a majority of the opposition parties band together. There is no political party, no opposition party in the country which on its own can take on the BJP-led combination. So they ought to have done this a lot, organized and finished with this seat distribution much earlier. Now, on the last date of filing nominations, you're running around scampering. So we have to wait and watch to see how this is many believe an opportunity missed, because there was a tremendous amount of momentum generated by the Rahul Gandhi Tejasvi Yatra. In fact, the entire lot were there. Mr. Sahni was there, the CPI-ML leaders were there, everybody was there, and they generated a fair amount of traction. They ought to have built on that. Soon after that, if they had sat down and thrashed out these seat-sharing arrangements in the next couple of days, it would have given them a head start. But anyway, it is what it is, and now we need to wait for the 14th to know.
Before we get into the fact that how this will really play out in terms of optics, I want to ask you, Yamini, that there has been an effort, like in recent elections, that a slew of welfare measures have already been announced even before any seat sharing arrangements were announced. We saw that 10,000 rupees has been promised by the BJP and Nitish Kumar. Before that, after that, we saw Tejasvi Yadav promising a government job to every family in Bihar. So and you've written about this as well, the fact that there's a new model of politics that's developing in which welfare is coming to people, but only in the form of election promises. How do you see this? The fact that even before elections are formally announced, these welfare promises as election promises are rolled out.
So actually, think back to 2014 and then think back to the Bihar election. If I think it was November of 2015. In 2014, candidate Modi had positioned himself to India as this market reformer, maximum governance, minimum government. As soon as he became Prime Minister Modi, one of his most widely cited statements that NREGA was this kind of monument to poverty, and we are all about poverty empowerment, not entitlements, poverty alleviation. A kind of presenting himself as a very different kind, a non-welfarist, pro-market, economic growth kind of prime minister. And by the time we hit 2015 of Bihar elections, Rahul Gandhi's one big pipe, at that point, the Congress was looking even more decimated than the Democratic Party in the US is looking like today. But Rahul Gandhi managed to come up with one little statement that caught the imagination of the suit boot Sarkar, and that hit and hurt. And if you trace the evolution of Modi the welfarist, for all the ravery talk, Modi the welfarist has been a phenomenon from the moment he saw the consequences of the suit boot ki sarkar. And then there was this preparation for the UP election that came a few years later, against the backdrop of which the Ujjwala scheme and Swachh Bharat and in fact you can see even in the budgets the increase in centrally sponsored schemes all come as a consequence, I think, of the hit both in Delhi, first the Delhi election where the Aam Aadmi Party won, and then really more pronouncedly from Bihar. So Bihar has been a very important, played a very important role in shaping the Modi, the welfarist. The welfarist that we see today is indeed a welfarist that is redesigned in some senses the entire architecture of welfarism in India, that it is not about public investments in public goods as much as it is about public investments in private goods, particularly cash, and with technology, the direct benefit transfers have become a really critical tool. And we can see in the data, in fact, I've been working on this quite closely with another colleague, you can see in the data how effectively DBT can be deployed to kind of personalize and develop a very emotive connection with the voter. The voter, in fact, is the Labharthi, not the rights-bearing citizen, but the beneficiary, the recipient of this largesse via DBT that has, Modi's picture on it. And it has a very, you can see how this impacts the attribution effects on voting. So when you ask voters in surveys, who do you credit for schemes? It used to be much more mixed, center state. In the old, when you are investing in public systems, given the nature of our constitution, it's state governments that play a very important role in implementation. So credit attribution was widespread. In these DBT-like schemes, it really does rest very much in the party leader. And you can also see a very close correlation between those who attribute schemes to the Prime Minister and voting choices for the BJP. The 2024 election were really interesting because state governments and party leaders in regional parties too have picked up on precisely this power of what cash transfers can do. And in some of my work, I've been able, you can actually see in the data that state chief ministers, Mamta and West Bengal is a really good example, that have followed precisely this direct cash transfers, very emotive connection between party leader and the beneficiary, were effective in cutting the welfarist frame of Modi. But it's a tool now that has become very deeply embedded in our politics. No political party is willing to go into an election without making these promises of cash transfers of all kinds. You saw in Maharashtra, of course, there's many questions to be asked about the Maharashtra election and everything else, but the consistent theme was the introduction of a cash transfer, then postponing the election to ensure that at least 5 or 6, or I think 7 tranches were delivered.
Five of them in one go?
And then so going into the election, it certainly had an impact. In Jharkhand, I saw in very closely in some of our data, the announcement of the Mukhya Mantri Maiya scheme also had an impact. So in a sense, now this has become part of the playbook. It has huge, I mean, I have to say, I am a great believer in a robust welfare state, so I'm happy that money is going to people in whatever form. But in a democracy, we have to ask whether welfare is about making citizens labhartis or welfare is about recognizing as a state that you have a responsibility and citizens as rights-claiming actors can demand welfare. And it should be about investing in public institutions and public systems. Now we've kind of restricted ourselves to, aap 2,000 rupees denge, to aap 3,000 rupees denge, and that is what the electoral competition is about. It's a sad statement on what is happening to the social contract, but I suppose it's better that we're doing this than only 2As taking away all of the largesse of the state.
But just to follow up on what she's saying, the fact that this is happening and governments should be providing welfare to citizens anyway, but this comes packaged in the form of election promises just before elections, and it's not just the BJP, across the board all political parties are doing this. But Modi himself calls this reverie culture, but then he goes on to do this himself as well. So should this model be then accepted as a way of Indian political life now, or should there be a means that need to be found to ensure that this is not just a poll promise? Because we saw in Maharashtra, especially in the Ladki Behna Yojana, that the final tranches were not given. So how do you see this?
Look, this is a template. This template has now been set, and this puts the central government or the party in power at a greater advantage than the opposition. There is very little the opposition. What can the opposition do to counter this in, say, like a state like Bihar? They are in the opposition. They'll promise you, okay, they'll promise you 20,000 rupees. But as against a promise, it's the Bihar government with the help of the center is already dispersing 10,000. So there's 10,000 in cash. People will, and there's a promise of more to come if and when the Mahagathbandhan comes to power. So obviously the one who's transferring the cash stands to gain. And this, many believe that this is an either it should become state policy and it happens over 2 years or a year, then it's understandable. But if it's announced just a couple of months ahead of the elections, this should be considered a malpractice, and the election commission should step in, or the court should step in and lay down the line on this. That these cash transfers, this is a more glorified form of greasing the palms.
So just on that, I think it's an important point you're making, but it's a good debate to have, in the sense that the whole purpose of, in a democracy, the whole purpose of an election is for healthy electoral competition and for citizens and voters to determine who and how they want to hold their politicians to account. So I have to confess, have less of a, I think that we reduce voter agency by thinking of this as bribing or as malpractice, as much as it's a part and parcel of democracy. And of course it should be corrected, and it has to be something that is not just given in the run-up to an election and then disappears. There has to be a broader accountability mechanism.
Okay, so correct me if I am wrong. In Maharashtra, soon after the election, the scheme was brought to a halt. They said this is being reviewed and there are certain discrepancies. Once everything is set right, we will start again. So it was introduced.
Absolutely.
It was introduced for that period to ensure that your immediate purpose of winning the elections is solved, and then if it was really meant for empowerment, for alleviation of poverty, of really helping the poor and the down and out, then this should have continued, should have been brought in much earlier and ought to have continued. So
no, I agree. I'm just making a conceptual distinction. So absolutely, in the sense that the politician is using these tools instrumentally in order to be able to have a tool for the elections. And it is unconscionable that after the election and after the victory, the program suddenly disappears. There have to be accountability mechanisms baked in. I agree with you that it certainly appears like a very robust reverie rather than serious welfareism. I guess I am saying, can we make a distinction between the idea that politicians making promises in the run-up to elections, or even perhaps delivering on a few things in the run-up to election, is that necessarily good or bad? That's a conceptual issue, and then what is actually happening?
And to be fair, it's not something which has started now. It's just that it's been modified and improved upon. Earlier, in your father's home state, of Tamil Nadu, Jayalalitha used to and Karunanidhi used to distribute free pressure cookers and stuff like that. So it started from free pressure cookers and cooking utensils, and now it's come to direct transfer.
But it also speaks to the economic question, right? Like, why is DBT the tool of all politicians of all colors and hues today? It has everything to do with the fact that we have an economy that has simply failed to generate jobs for the vast majority. And to the extent that any political party has an imagination for the core structural transformation of the economy in which jobs matter, it's limited to government jobs. So think about the other promise in Bihar, right? So it's cash transfers plus one government job in every household. So there's a huge, bigger issue in which then cash transfers has become the lolly that is handed out.
And on this question of promising jobs, there are only 23 lakh jobs, as Prashant Kishore has been repeating ad nauseum. Only 23 lakh jobs that the state government has, right from chief secretary downwards to the peon. And if you are going to promise a job for every unemployed youth or one unemployed youth from every family, where are the jobs going to come from?
So these are important questions that, of course, as Yamini was saying, that importantly put a spotlight on the state of the economy in Bihar, and a lot of discussion needs to focus on that as well in the run-up to the elections, while we, of course, will be keeping an eye on all the seat-sharing arrangements and the political developments. But this is an important feature that is coming out of Bihar, also because it's one of the poorest states in the country, and what happens in Bihar has huge repercussions for the Indian economy as a whole. But let's also bring in at this point the fact that US President Donald Trump has once again triggered a row in India after he claimed that Prime Minister Narendra Modi had agreed to stop buying Russian oil. Now, India has sidestepped giving a direct response to this, saying that its energy policy is diverse, broad-based, and it's continuing to diversify its sources. Now, Trump told reporters that he was happy that India was buying oil, and he meaning Modi, had assured him that he would stop buying oil from Russia. So, how do you see the Modi government's response, where they have once again kind of sidestepped what the White House is saying by giving a generic answer of we are continuing to diversify our sources?
So at one level, you could argue this has been a strategy, as in Trump says a lot of things. There may well be elements of truth in it. There may well be Trump being Trump in it. And we have adopted a kind of, if you think from Operation Sindoor onwards, we have adopted this a strategy to the of sidestepping this and trying to avoid any direct confrontation. It's interesting indeed that Modi did not go to Anga, did not go to Sharm el Sheikh. Nirmala Sitharaman has not gone to Washington. In some senses, we seem to be quote unquote non-confrontationalists. The question is, what are we actually doing, and how are we? What is our foreign policy? How are we dealing with the kind of onslaught of daily claims that are being made? And what is the truth that the Indian public really ought to be told of how we are managing what is, of course, a somewhat difficult situation? And there, the opacity is a serious issue. So I think it is very clear, which you can only second guess by piecing all these diplomatic words that are put out as communique from the MEA routinely, that there seems to be an effort to try and continue the dialogues over the tariffs, regardless of what is happening on the top. There, in the process of continuing the dialogue, there is a question of leverage. India does not have leverage, which is one of the reasons why we have not gone down the China route or the Brazil route of direct confrontation. And India also has agriculture, dairy. These are very clear red lines that are going to be very difficult to sidestep. So if you put it all together, and if we remain committed to continuing a dialogue, what are we going to be giving? It seems to me the only thing that we are likely to be able to find a quiet way of doing is this oil, and so I think, so if I piece it all together, I think in fact there's some truth to Trump's latest loose cannon remark. Whether or not he and the Prime Minister spoke, anybody's guess. But the bigger question for us as the Indian public is what exactly is our strategy, and can we as the public transparently know what is happening? And there, I think, of course, old habits die hard. This is all being kept under a veil of all kinds of secrecy, and we will find out through Trump's next tweet.
So this is something that the opposition has been saying, that these bits of information are coming from the US president and not from our government. And this has once again allowed the opposition to kind of question the government about its foreign policy, and that Trump is making a certain number of claims, as he has been since Operation Sindoor, on which the government has not wholly come clean. So do you think this has placed BJP on the back foot, even though they deny being on the back foot?
Well, certainly, most certainly, and even in that an hour and 40-minute long speech that the Prime Minister gave in Parliament, he never mentioned this question. They've never directly said or responded to queries whether or not they spoke to Mr. Trump, whether or not there was a communication from Mr. Trump. They have never addressed that elephant in the room. I mean, even now, our energy needs are being diversified, and we all know it's being diversified, and it should be diversified. But what about the fact he says that Modi has assured me? So how can I assure you unless I speak to you? No? And if somebody asks me that, if I've spoken to you, I should be able to say so. Or if I haven't, I would say it even more rightly to know. So obviously there is something happening which the government is afraid of taking us into conference. And it's all right to be able to diversify and all that. But if you're seen as acting under pressure from the US and discontinuing your oil supplies from Russia, that I'm afraid will not go down very well with them. Because irrespective of the bonhomie being displayed between the Indian political leadership and American, the fact is that most Indians still look on, even those who have their children living in the US, look on the US with great amount of suspicion. Russia is an old, tried, trusted friend and this relationship has stood the test of times. When the chips were down, they were on our side. They've always been on our side, and this is not something that you can forget very easily. You don't have to be a Putin admirer, or you don't have to be a confirmed leftist or any of that. It's not so much ideological, just the fact that they've stood by. We still buy 70 or 60% of our military hardware from Russia. Who's going to supply all that? It's very easy for Mr. Trump to say that discontinue. Suppose we decide that day after tomorrow we'll discontinue. Where are all the aircraft? And if we can't afford those, the end user problems that the Americans have, the Russians have always been. So it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be very easy for Mr. Modi and all the others to keep obfuscating and keep trying to hoodwink people. Ultimately, they'll have to they'll have to confront this question. And the thing is that the Indian media ought to have been asking a lot more pointed questions on this rather than just, the usual suspects raising a hue and cry. When Parliament meets, the opposition will raise this question. 3/4 of the session will be washed out, then towards the end, they'll have a debate. Much of what transpires will be drowned out in the din. So what happens? Once the debate is over, it's over. All the questions that were asked on Operation Sindoor, is it even a part of public discourse? Because every day there is something new happening in this country.
So we'll have to see how the government responds to that in Parliament, which is still over a month away. But what's happening in the national capital is that, interestingly, the Supreme Court has allowed the sale and use of green crackers in the Delhi NCR region during Diwali, and the court has permitted this on Diwali as well as one day before the festival. Now, in doing so, the court has said that we have to take a balanced approach, permitting it in moderation while not compromising with the environment. Now, this is interesting because the apex court's order has come after considering pleas of both the government of NCR, that is the BJP government, as well as the central government, which wanted relaxing of the existing ban on the sale of use of firecrackers in Delhi. Is this unusual to you that the government is urging the court to consider the sale of firecrackers in a city which everybody knows gets very deeply polluted at this time of the year?
It's unusual because the government is totally disregarding the ground realities in Delhi. And how on earth are they going to distinguish between a green firecracker and a normal firecracker? Just because you put a green sticker, will it make it less? Will the air get better in Delhi as it is? We are seeing, we've already, even before the first firecracker has been burst, you can see that the air in Delhi is getting worse by the day. And what happens day after tomorrow? And I just fear this just doesn't make sense to me. This order, with all due respect to the apex court, it just, I can understand the political reasons for this, for the central government and for the Delhi government to come up with this crazy proposal, but for the Supreme Court to allow this to happen, it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me.
So this is interesting because, of course, there has been a lot of pressure on the Aam Aadmi Party government, which was the government in Delhi before this, about the rising pollution levels. And now the Supreme Court has allowed this. And as Javed is saying, that the political reasons seem pretty obvious, given that the BJP is now in power in Delhi as well as in the center, and the sentiment of the Hindus during Diwali are important. But does this defy logic in a public policy sense? Because for very many years, there has been an effort to find a solution to the problem of pollution in Delhi, NCR, Haryana, Punjab. And instead of finding a solution, lasting solution to that, we have the Supreme Court giving this order. Is that a setback to these efforts?
I think the entire story of how, from a policy perspective, of how we are dealing with air pollution is actually a story of how we are not dealing with air pollution. So to me, it's almost like, bans also have their problems. They don't really work. Tell me one Diwali when the ban was enforced, when actually you did not hear firecrackers in large parts of the city. To me, the real issue is the absolute abject failure to deal with what is a remarkably serious problem, one that has only gotten worse over time and not better, that has multiple factors. It's a complicated problem. It has multiple factors that are contributing to air pollution. Diwali and firecrackers is one, maybe not one day, 3, 4, 5 days. Farm fires is another long stretch that comes. There's a whole set of vehicular pollution, and there's a whole set of factors, how we burn our waste. All of it contributes to making this hellhole that we all still live in the middle of these 2-3 months. The real issue to me is what is it about our politics and policy that is simply not able to take what should be, frankly, a global embarrassment in the national capital of the country, where dignitaries from all over the world come, that you had to prepone your G20 to September, when usually it happens in November and December, and the only explanation is that it would be embarrassing to have the rest of the world come when you can't even see. Like, even Modi would not have been able to see the camera at that point because there's so much fog, right?
That would have been a huge tragedy.
So this really needs serious, concerted effort across governments. It needs the bureaucracy to think very innovatively, because this is not a problem that can be resolved in one silo. The phrase we use in that public policy uses the airshed approach, which is not determined by political jurisdiction. It is across. It's a geographical concept. So governments have to work together. Society has to shift. I mean, I find it very amusing that for all the talk of the Delhi elite about pollution, that the answer is, let's close down schools because the rich have air purifiers. We have now privatized our own air. But the vast majority of Delhi doesn't have the luxury of sitting at home sealing themselves up into air purifiers. For all the talk of needing to resolve pollution, everyone has SUVs and are driving their children to school in those SUVs. The children will come off with their N95s, but they've been sitting in the car creating like all forms of vehicular pollution. So there's a whole set of things that need to happen. I almost look at this. I also must give my bias. I used to love the firecrackers as a kid. So with that bias, I look at what is happening in the courts as, this is all expected. This is just, we have not been able to seriously take this problem, seriously think carefully, sensibly, and in a concerted mission mode manner to actually resolve it. And there's lots that we can learn from from our neighbors, particularly in China. Beijing has shown many different things of how you can resolve this, but it requires a very deep and cross-party, cross-society, cross-government approach. And again, also now you've had the green crackers. Soon you'll hear about some cloud burst that will come, some huge air purifier in Anand Vihar that is going to suck up all the air. I mean, can we get rid of all this nonsense and seriously take this problem as seriously as it deserves and arrive at a collective public policy consensus that is not caught in partisanship, and that is also not caught in elitism, which sometimes creates very skewed policy outcomes.
All right, and before we wrap up, very quickly, we want to also touch upon the fact that there's been a huge reshuffle in the Gujarat cabinet. A total of 21 new ministers were sworn in as a part of the newly constituted cabinet under Chief Minister Bhupendra Patel, and this follows a mass resignation of ministers in the state government, all of whom resigned except the Chief Minister. Now, today, when the reshuffle took place and the new ministers took oath, BJP's president as well as Union Minister JP Nadda was present at that oath-taking ceremony. Very quickly, Javed, what is behind this mega reshuffle where the entire cabinet has moved out and the new cabinet has joined in less than a day?
Well, so obviously the Gujarat government was not delivering or performing to the standards that Prime Minister Modi expects, and he wants to show his clout and demonstrate that, look, as far as he's concerned, he can get, if you don't perform, he can get the shift out the entire, can change a whole lot of ministers. Whereas look at what happens in the opposition states. They can't even decide on their candidates, leave alone, asking ministers to resign.
But before we wrap up quickly, Yamini.
And this is not the first time. He did, even before the last elections, when the new chief minister was made, when they changed the chief minister, they changed the entire lot of ministers there. So he's done it twice now.
Does this beg the question of transparency once again? Because when a whole government is changed, does the government need to provide any reason for why this has been done and when a wholesale change has taken place in less than a day?
No, of course. But it also highlights a feature of the federal question that we don't talk about so much, I think, in many of our debates on this issue, which is how powerful actually the Chief Minister's office has become over, it has a longer history over a period of 20, 30 years, but particularly post-liberalization, basically, and how centralized state governments are. I mean, the Gujarat model of centralizing power within the Chief Minister's office has been replicated now in the Prime Minister's office here in Delhi. But you go across the country, the Chief Minister's office has become the center of where governance happens. But parliamentary democracy is designed on the basis of first among equals, that that the cabinet of ministers has a clearly articulated set of responsibilities and therefore a set of accountabilities to cabinet and to the people. But this kind of centralization totally breaks that. So even in Delhi now, the question often is like, who are the ministers? You can barring 4 or 5, they've become so irrelevant to governance because it's become so centralized in the PMO. This phenomenon has existed in states for a long time across party lines now. This extensive centralization into the CMO's office is something to be really wary of because it undermines fundamental first principles of governance, accountability, and transparency. And it allows for moments as like this. Of course, Gujarat takes it to a whole other extreme where 2 individuals not even sitting in Gujarat can essentially get rid of the whole cabinet.
So this transfer order may have been signed by the CMO of Gujarat, but we know where the orders came from.
All right, so that's all that we have time for in this edition of the Wire Wrap. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us and to our viewers for watching.